Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Stephen Brown, and in today's video, guys, I want to talk about a couple of players who I think the Toronto Maple Leafs should be considering trading for this offseason. So far this offseason, the Maple Leafs have added to their blue line, and they've signed a backup goalie. But in terms of their forward core, they lost Tyler Bertuzzi, and all they've really done so far is re-sign Max Domi. And when you take a look at the list of remaining free agent forwards sorted by points, Joe Pavelski doesn't really count because he's either going to retire or re-sign with the Dallas Stars. There are a couple of interesting names here, but I don't think there are any players that fit what the Maple Leafs really need. We've talked about this several times in past videos, but I really think the Maple Leafs need to add a third line center that is more capable than a guy like Max Domi. And that's not a diss on him. He filled in very admirably for the team in the playoffs. It's just that during the regular season, if we're looking at the line that he spent the most amount of time playing center on, it was with Nick Robertson and Calle Yarncroke in a larger offensive sheltered role. And the percentages look pretty good for this line, but when we're looking at just the volume and quality of offense that they produced together, they were 125th among forward lines to play at least 100 minutes together in expected goals for per 60 minutes. That's extremely disappointing. The only way I could see Domi sticking long term at center is if you stapled him to a guy like Mitch Marner, and that's how Domi was able to have success at center last year in the playoffs. He played most of those minutes with Marner. And maybe you can run out a line of all former London Knights, Cowan, Domi, and Marner, but this might work offensively, but Marner's usually relied upon to play more of a shutdown role sometimes, and overall, I don't think that it makes much sense. I would much rather play Max Domi on the wing next to Austin Matthews, where he played his best hockey last season, and acquire somebody else to play center. That way, you just have more depth, right? If there's an injury, Domi can always fill in a pinch, but he's best suited on the wing. Now, if you notice the cap space up in the top corner of the screen, in this situation, they would have $50,000 in space to go out and find another centerman. So obviously, in order to acquire this player, they would need to subtract from their roster. Some of you might be saying, why don't you just bump David Kampf up, let Pontus Holmberg be your fourth line center, move some other things around, and there you go. You got an opening night lineup. And you could do that, but I don't think David Kampf is versatile enough to be this team's third line center. He's a very good defensive player. He wins a lot of faceoffs. He's very good on the penalty kill. He works hard, but he's not good enough offensively. And I don't think that Pontus Holmberg is either. He could be, but I would rather him earn that spot than give it to him right out the gate, especially if they could afford to just go out and get somebody better from the start and use Pontus Holmberg as like a plan B or a plan C instead. But also, I think to spend $2.4 million on a fourth line center, especially for this team, is too rich, especially if you want to go quality over quantity and you want to have that versatile third line center so that you could roll three lines. I think you have to move on from David Kampf, and I think it's a foregone conclusion that they're going to be moving on from a guy like Connor Timmins as well. So if you move out David Kampf and Connor Timmins and then call up Fraser Minton, the Maple Leafs could potentially have upwards of $2.7 million to work with to acquire a third line center that's more versatile than David Kampf. And I think it's possible. The first player that I'd like to talk about is Yanni Gourde from the Seattle Kraken. And the first thing that may jump out at you is that he's 5'9 and 174 pounds. But if you'll remember him when he was busy winning back-to-back Stanley Cups with the Tampa Bay Lightning, being their third line center, playing a shutdown role for them, he plays a much bigger game than just 5'9 and 174 pounds. And the 11 goals and 33 points that he had last year may not jump out at you as a real big upgrade over David Kampf, but at the same time, the entire Seattle team as a whole took a step back last season, and we're going to take a look at his numbers from this past year in a minute, and you'll see that he was much better compared to his Seattle line mates. In a better situation, I think the goal scoring will come back. This is a guy who's scored 20 goals multiple times in his career, and he's also received Selke votes. And if we come on over to hockeyviz.com, We can see that the Seattle Kraken at 5-on-5 were a better offensive team with Yanni Gourde on the ice compared to when they weren't. So that's why I think if Gourde was playing on a better offensive team overall, like the Maple Leafs, his numbers, the 11 goals, 33 points, those numbers would go up, especially if he's playing with better line mates. And if the Maple Leafs were rolling three lines, he would definitely have better line mates and more opportunities to produce offensively. But at the same time, defensively, they were better without him than with him, but still, they were a good defensive team when he was out there on the ice and a better overall team when he was out there. Now, Gourde does make $5.1 million per season, so the Maple Leafs would need Seattle to retain some money in this deal, but he's only got 1 year left on his contract, so I don't see that being too much of a road bump here. And here's why I think that they may be willing to do it. They gave big money to Chandler Stevenson this offseason. They need to re-sign Matty Beniers. They have Shane Wright. Jared McCann can play center as well, and a number of other guys on their roster. This is a team that really struggled to score goals, especially last season. And if they're looking for some more goal scoring, well, then can I interest you in Nick Robertson, who only scored 14 goals last year, but when you consider he did it only playing 11 or 12 minutes a night and not getting a lot of power play time, there's potential for him in a larger role to maybe score 20 goals. I'm not saying the deal is 1-for-1. I don't know exactly what it looks like. Maybe they want David Kampf. So, it's Robertson, David Kampf, maybe a mid-round pick, maybe a lesser prospect of some sort. I don't know. Point being, Yanni Gourde is a very good player, and if you can get him at 50% retained, I would love him on the Maple Leafs third line. The next player is Jean-Gabriel Pageau. He's not very big at 5'11" and 185 pounds, but literally all this guy has done for the better part of the last decade is win faceoffs, chew up an obnoxious amount of defensive zone draws, and be an excellent, excellent defensive two-way center that has received Selke votes in 7 different seasons. 11 goals, 33 points, just like Yanni Gourde, doesn't jump out at you. But if you look in the previous seasons, 13 goals and 40 points, 18 goals, 39 points, 14 goals, 28 points, but in only 54 games. He had a bad season. And this isn't the part where I tell you, oh, compared to the rest of his teammates, he was actually pretty good. No, he had a bad season. If we're looking at the advanced numbers on all3zones.com here, we could see a large spread of the numbers in different scenarios here. He still was a decent player at getting the puck out of his own zone and stopping the other team from gaining the defensive blue line, but this is not the same player from the last 10 years that received Selke votes in 7 different seasons. If we're looking at the numbers from just the previous year, again, these numbers are in both years in obnoxiously difficult defensive minutes, but he was much better the previous season. And if you're acquiring this player, you are taking a risk that he has just fallen off. Those are really difficult minutes, and he's played a lot of them over the last number of years. Just like Gourde, it would take a creative move in order for the Maple Leafs to afford this player because he does make $5 million for the next 2 seasons, so it is riskier. At least with Gourde, when you look at the point totals and they're down, you look at the numbers, they're down, but there's reason to be optimistic, like we talked about, for him having a bounce back season. With Pageau, you're going in with a little bit more blind optimism than maybe you would like, and maybe that's why the Islanders are willing to retain some money. Maybe they're willing to attach a sweetener, trade him to another team. That team is willing to retain money and flip him to the Leafs for something, or that team has an arbitration case and they're able to take advantage of their second buyout window. I don't know. In that scenario where he gets bought out, obviously you can sign him to a much cheaper deal on a 1-year contract, and it's not as risky. But on his current deal, you would be taking a risk in this player having a bounce back season because he was not very good the year previous. The next player, Morgan Frost, is a bit different than Yanni Gourde and Jean-Gabriel Pageau because while those guys are more two-way players or you can rely on them to play bigger defensive minutes ideally, Frost is more of an offensive player. Those other guys are also 31 and 32 years old. Frost is 25, and, if he continues to develop, maybe he could be a second-line center. Like we said, with him being 25, a former first round pick, it would be nice to have some young center depth in the organization. And he had 41 points in 71 games last year, 46 points and 19 goals the year before that. Apparently, his name has come up in trade rumors because him and Tortorella don't really get along too well. He was healthy scratched at different points last year. They were maybe thinking that he was going to get traded at some point last season, but they ended up holding on to him. So maybe they do end up holding on to him. But if they do make him available in a trade, I would definitely be interested. He makes just $2.1 million for this upcoming year, and then he's an RFA afterwards. So the Maple Leafs could afford this player without needing any salary retention. They would just need to move out, like we said earlier in the video, Connor Timmins, David Kampf. Maybe the Flyers are interested in David Kampf. I don't know. He seems like a John Tortorella type player. But at the high end, he's probably a low end second line center, and at his worst, which is what he is right now, is he's an offensive option on your third line, which I wouldn't hate because the Maple Leafs have really struggled to score in the playoffs over the last couple of years, and if you can plug him in and he's a more offensive option on your third line, it gives you an extra line that can contribute. If we threw all the options into a chart here and we got some numbers to go with them, I tried to rank them in order of who I would prefer the most to who I would prefer the least. And there are some guys on here that we didn't talk about in this specific video, but that I've mentioned in the past. A guy like Ross Colton, who it looks like the Avalanche are going to try to hold on to this player, and I don't blame them. He is very good, but he would also be the most expensive and most difficult for the Maple Leafs to acquire because, again, he is good, but also he makes $4 million, and the Avalanche are definitely not willing to retain on that player. And I have Barrett Hayton second here. He's a centerman from the Utah Hockey Club. He's 24 years old, so he's similar to Morgan Frost in the sense that he has the potential to maybe become a second line center. And I have him above Frost just because he's produced good results in less of a sheltered role, but I don't know if he's going to be available or not. Utah probably elects to hold on to him. Jack McBain is here. He's also from Utah. He's just really big. He's 6'6" and over 200 pounds. He threw 300 hits last season, but I view him more as a fourth line center than anything else. So that would be more of a bonus kind of thing. But of the three players that we discussed the most in this video, Yanni Gourde, Morgan Frost, Jean-Gabriel Pageau, if you're looking for that two-way centerman that could play good defense but also pitch in some offense, you're going between Yanni Gourde and Jean-Gabriel Pageau. And Pageau coming off of such a disappointing year last year, I would prefer Yanni Gourde. And also, I could see a more realistic trade happening. There's an easier path to acquiring Gourde than Pageau with the cap situation that the Islanders are in and what they would have to do in order to make that trade work. With Seattle, yes, they need to sign Matty Beniers, but they have cap space, they have flexibility, they have a lot of centermen, so he could be available, and they need help scoring, right? And we have a guy like Nick Robertson who could be available that if they're willing to retain on Gourde, maybe you can have Kampf and a pick or another prospect, and I really like that player for the Leafs. If we're looking at the roster on the screen right now, first of all, it's cap compliant. Secondly, this is a 22-man roster, right? We have an extra forward and an extra defenseman here. Who that extra forward and defenseman is, I don't really care. You can rearrange the lines however way you like them. That's not the point of the video here. And the point is that it's cap compliant. There's 22 guys here, which in the past, the Maple Leafs have only ever been able to afford a 20 or a 21-man roster. And that puts them in really hairy spots where guys are banged up and bruised and they either have to play short or those guys are playing hurt in November, December, January, February. And it's just like, that's not what this is about, right? You got to make sure you have the best team possible come April and May. And if you have the ability to rest guys, that definitely does help. But this roster also has three lines that you can roll offensively and expect to pitch in and score. And right now, as it currently sits, the Maple Leafs bottom six is a train wreck offensively. It's a train wreck. If you're looking at the line of Nick Robertson, Pontus Holmberg, and Kalle Järnkrok from this past year's playoffs, those guys put up 0 goals, 0 points, 0, 0, 0 all the way across the board. And you can't tell me that getting more scoring from your depth wouldn't have made a difference because they literally lost in game 7 of overtime. 1 goal would have made all the difference. The series against the Montreal Canadiens, they lost 3 games in overtime. You're not going to tell me that more depth scoring wouldn't have made a difference. Obviously, you would have wanted a guy like Matthews or Marner or Nylander to just step up and score that goal, but it's not always going to be those guys. You know, you need your bottom 6 to chip in. You need depth scoring. And right now, the bottom 6 is a train wreck offensively. In this scenario here, they have 3 lines that they can roll offensively. The defense, it is improved. Chris Tanev is a major upgrade over Ilya Lyubushkin or Joel Edmondson. Yes, he's old, but he's going to be good next year. Oliver Ekman-Larsson, the same thing. He's not perfect, but he's an upgrade over those guys. You know, you can spread the depth around here. If Yanni Hakanpää is healthy, he should be very good. The Stars relied upon him to play heavy defensive minutes in their top 4. Of course, we don't know what's going on with him. If he's not ready to go, obviously, you put him on LTIR. Maybe Connor Timmins is still on the roster. He makes less money. It's going to be cap compliant. Philippe Myers, who's huge, 6'5", 230 pounds. Maybe he's the 7th defenseman for them. They can save a little bit more cap space that way. There's more options here. You know, Anthony Stolarz had a great season. He should be more reliable than Ilya Samsonov. Yes, this isn't a perfect goalie tandem. Yes, neither of them have played more than 30 games in a single season. But, you know, every team that wins the Stanley Cup needs to be good to get lucky, and they need to be lucky to get good, or whatever the saying is. You know, you're not going to have a perfect roster. It's not going to be 100% skill and no luck. The point is that you got to try to mitigate how much luck you need to win. And I think with a roster like this, with a better third line, with with more options, so it's a 22-man roster, with an improved defense, with goaltending that should be more consistent, I think that this Leafs team is better. You could confidently say they are better. How much better? I don't know. Obviously, they're going to need to play the games for us to figure that out. But at the same time, this is the only way that I'm comfortable with them running it back. You know, because they found a solution. They needed a third line center. Maybe it's not the best one out there, but we can reasonably optimistically say that, you know, Yanni Gourde is going to be more versatile and going to provide you with more value than a guy like David Kampf. We could say that. We looked at the numbers. They filled that hole. Fraser Minton, Easton Cowan, maybe you get contributions from young players. You need that. You know, the Dallas Stars had major contributions from Wyatt Johnson, Logan Stankoven, and they came out of nowhere. Can the Leafs have one of these two guys step up and do something here? If you want to move on from Calle Yarncroke, go ahead and move on from him. I don't care. The point being is that they cannot afford to go into the regular season with the bottom 6 currently as constructed. It's a disaster. It's a disaster. I'm not saying that there's no merit to just rolling with what they got and maybe looking to fix the problem in season, after giving other guys, you know, larger opportunities to show that they can hack it in those roles. I'm just saying that I'm not very optimistic. And if you could go out there and you can fix the problem now, I would rather fix the problem now. To sum everything up, because that was a lot of rambling, I think that this is the best that they can do. You know, if they're not going to move on from one of the core 4 guys, obviously. And it's not because I don't want them to, I just don't think that they're going to. So it's not that I think that this is bad either. I do think that this is better than what they've had in years past for all the reasons that we've discussed. I genuinely do believe that. How much better? I don't know. How much better is it going to be when you get to game 7 in overtime? That's the real question, right? Because they haven't been able to do it. Well, they did it once. They did it once and then fell on their face immediately the week afterwards, which is frustrating. But make sure to let me know what your thoughts are down in the comment section below. Make sure to like the video if you did like it and subscribe for more, because more is on the way. And we'll talk about Marner, Tavares, the core 4 in the next video.